It'll be, that way I can, okay. So when you're trying to decide how many days to take off from work, it brings us to the question of second day holidays. Now, you may be well versed in what I'm about to say, and so, but if you're not, if you gotta, we gotta spend 5 minutes on this. So, what does it mean if you get out your Jewish calendar and it says that the first day of Passover is a holiday and the second day of Passover is a holiday? And then when you look at the end of the holiday, it says that the seventh day of Passover is a holiday and the eighth day of Passover is a holiday. And on it thou shalt do no work. And you're like, okay, but now I'm confused because in the Torah it says that the, the it says that Passover is only 7 days. There is no 8 days of Passover in the Torah, and the first day is a holiday, and the seventh day is a holiday, but the second day is not a holiday, and there is no eighth day. And this comes up with other holidays, actually, all of the other holidays. So Sukkot, if you do the holiday of Sukkot, then the first day is a holiday, but now today it says on the calendar the second day is a holiday, and I'm not allowed to go to work. And then you look at the end, and it says at the end of Sukkot, you get the holiday of Shmini Atzeret. But if you live outside the land of Israel, you do a second day of Shmini Atzeret. And coming up is Shavuot in about 47 days. And in Israel, it's 1 day. In the Torah, it's 1 day. But on the Jewish calendar you get in America, it says it's 2 days. And you have to take 2 days off of work. So how do we understand all that and where'd that come from? And if you've ever looked it up, it has a really simple answer, which is prior to the 3rd century. So we're talking about 1700 years ago. Am I right? So year 2000, about right. Good. Maybe 1800 years ago. So according to the Mishnah, which it comes from before the 3rd century of the Common Era, is published basically in this at the end of the 2nd century. In the land of the way to start a holiday and to end a holiday, but the way to start a holiday and end a holiday had you convened a court, you convened a tribunal, and the tribunal of the Beit Din, like if you convert, then you'll have a tribunal, or you'll have a Beit Din of 3 rabbis for your conversion. So they would convene a Beit Din, and a witness would testify about seeing the phase of the moon. And based on the testimony of the witnesses about seeing the phase of the moon, they would say the holiday has begun. And then they would do, and I don't know how much of this is urban legend and how much of this is false history and what is true, but there's no question that at that point they would send messengers. Some people say signal fires. There would be a way of notifying other communities that the holiday had begun. Now, I don't know how much of this is historically accurate. For all I know, it's 100% historically accurate, but some things in the Mishnah may not be perfectly historically accurate. But in any case, we know that holidays were certified prior to the 3rd century by basically 3 rabbis getting together and saying the holiday has begun, or three officials saying the holiday has I guess imagine the mayor of the town. We officially begin 4th of July, where Veterans Day has now begun. So like they did it that way. But then in the 3rd century, they developed the calendar. And when the calendar became instituted, they did away with the idea of convening a Beit Din and having witnesses certified to the phases of the moon and the beginning of the holiday. So once that happened, so that's the history. So how does this affect the holidays? The tradition became that if you were in the land of Israel, the holiday began right when the Beit Din said it began. So if you're living in America and the head of the Supreme Court says, we officially declare that 4th of July has begun, let the fireworks commence, wherever you are in the country, it has begun. So wherever you were in the land of Israel, the holiday has begun, and you kept it for the normal 1-day period. But in order to allow messengers as signifiers to reach outside the land of Israel, it became decreed that in exile, in the diaspora lands, that you would have 2 days. So that is why there is a first day of Passover holiday And in Israel, it's still only one day. But if as soon as you leave the border of the land of Israel, there's this idea that you have a second day of the holiday that goes back 2,000 years. So any questions about that? But I'm going to talk a little bit more about, but since I'm not sure I'm very good at describing these things, does that make sense? Okay. So if it was America, it'd be like, but if you're living in Switzerland, then when the Supreme Court guy says today's the 4th of July, let the fireworks commence, it starts for you, but you have an extra day because it might take time for the signal fires or the messenger to reach Switzerland to tell the Americans there time to start your fireworks. So the tradition became that outside the land of Israel, you'd leave time for the messengers to get there, and so it became an extra day of holiday. That's the origin of keeping a second day of not working and an eighth day of not working for Pesach. It's the origin of having a second day of Rosh Hashanah. It's the argument for having a second day of Shavuot, a second day of Shemini Atzeret, all the festivals plus Rosh Hashanah. There is no second day of Yom Kippur. So the question arose even in the Talmud, which is, well, now that we have a calendar and we don't have a human being say the holiday has officially begun, and we don't have witnesses who are looking at cosmological events, should we have a second day? And it was a genuine debate. And apparently the tradition evolved rabbinically that outside the land of Israel, you would do a second day of the holiday, even though you know exactly when the holiday begins and ends, because you have a calendar like everybody else. And so it basically became an idea that it would be preserved as an extra day because it was longstanding tradition. So just if I said today, no one ever used to stand for this prayer, but now everyone stands for it. So let's stand for it because tradition. So it was one of the, in fact, I just was reading an academic article about a different topic. And it was on the issue that fascinates me about when cultural customs, especially late ones, become viewed as halakha. Like I just said, about standing for a prayer that no one stood for before. When does it become that we have to stand for it because it's a long-standing custom? And the article referred to second day holidays because it is the parade legal example in Jewish law of where at one point the rabbis just said, we keep it because it's tradition, even though the basis for it doesn't apply at all anymore. It's not about being in sync with the land of Israel. It is literally just to preserve a tradition that used to be for the sake just of preserving tradition. There are some people, scholars and rabbis, take it that in some ways it was like punishing us for being in diaspora, or does that make sense? Or trying to, or maybe in a good way saying, let's have more holiday because we live in exile. So you could view it as either a punishment for living in exile or as a positive for living in exile, which is we get an extra holiday, extra days of holiday because we're suffering in exile. This is all before 1948 and the establishment of the state of Israel in Palestine. So the question became after 1948 that many people believe that we should end the second day holiday outside the land of Israel because we have Israel. And we're all in sync with Israel and everything's great. So anyway, there's a debate about, so the Reform movement definitely got rid of second day holidays. So there's no second day Rosh Hashanah in Reform Judaism. There's no, you don't take off the second day of Sukkot. There's no eighth day of Pesach. There's no, so they don't do this second day and eighth day business. And in Israel, they don't either. So it's very important to know that. So if you're like, hey, I'm getting ready for the second day of Pesach and I'm gonna have a second Seder, they don't know what you're talking about in Israel. Because there was only one Seder. Where in the Torah does it say do two Seders? Okay, so that's kind of my way of explaining second day holidays. And the way I view it is this. When you're choosing to take off days from work, if there's, I would definitely consider not taking off second day holidays and eighth day holidays. It's so hard to get any days off of work. Do you know what I mean? I mean, look, if you're an independent contractor and I don't know, for a living, you're doing contract work and you can just say, you know what, I'm not going to have any business meetings on those days, then that's fine. If you're in control of your own destiny, of course, like why not take off an extra day of Passover? But when you're working for someone else and they're counting every day and you're trying to like have a wedding, and things like that, I definitely one place to not worry about taking off from me would be second day and eighth day holidays. I think that I think the idea of keeping that tradition is really problematic. Um, and I'll give you my blunt reason. You don't have to share it. Is that I've been living them since I was a kid. So I have 56 years of living second day holidays. And when I had a debate once with an Orthodox rabbi about this, because I was presenting that I think it's time that we probably get rid of the second day, eighth day thing, he looked at me and said, "But why wouldn't you want more holiness in your life?" Right? Like you get to expand Passover for a second day, and you get an extra 48 hours of Passover. Isn't that, you get more simcha, more joy, more joyful holiday. Like, why would you want to do away with that? And so all I'm saying is that in 56 years of life, I have not even once experienced the extra day of holiday as like amazing. I've mostly experienced it as um, like a marathon that I'm trying to get through to the finish line. Like, because I'm like, oh my, I mean, I don't know about you guys and how much shopping you did, but like, I already ran out of eggs and I ran out of potatoes, right? But I can't go out Friday shopping. And then it's Shabbat, right? So today, I'm like, I haven't gone shopping yet. I was at synagogue all morning. So like, the thing is, like, it's easy to say, don't, Lauren, don't you want more joy? Don't you want more holiness? All I'm saying is the way I've actually experienced it as a Jew is that I feel like there's a reason that if the Torah wanted us to have 50 hours of the beginning of Passover, it probably would have told us that. And so the idea that I'm supposed to be like, I can't go shopping, I can't go out, I can't drive my kids to, we can't drive to the park, like, I don't view that as great. And I view that also about when I used to have to take off work. I'm like, great. Now I don't, I mean, I used to do shifts. So I'm like, okay, so now like I don't do my shifts, but now I got to make it up. So great. By having an extra day I didn't really need for a holiday, now I've got to like work next Sunday. Um, or my brothers, like they're vets and things like that. So great. Now I've got to work Christmas and Easter and New Year's and 2 extra Sundays because I took off all the holidays for Passover. I've never experienced it as being awesome. So like I've really experienced it mostly as not adding joy to my holiday. So I'm a great believer that it is beautiful to add joy to Shabbat and it's beautiful to add joy to holidays. But again, it's if someone says, "Oh, no one ever told you it was easy being a Jew," or you just have to experience it as being more wonderful. I don't know. I think Passover is pretty wonderful without doing an extra day of it. So that, and especially because you got Shabbat in there too. From a rabbi's perspective, the biblical holiday is it's 7 days, three of which are holidays. Now in America, or in Orthodox Judaism, instead of it being a 7 day holiday with 3 days of holiday, first, last, and Shabbat, it's an 8 day holiday with 5 days of holiday. I mean, think about that. An 8 day holiday with 5 days of holiday. That's a lot of holiday. That's a lot of lighting candles, a lot of services. If you come to synagogue or you Zoomed them, they're like 3 hours long. You do 20 pages of extra prayers. So anyway, that's just my personal experience of them. And yet I still do them because sometimes we make we make all kinds of difficult decisions. It's very hard to get comfortable with being different than the rest of the conservative movement. So if I were in charge, I would really revisit the issue of second day holidays. Actually, I'll tell you one final thing about that. In the 1950s, conservative rabbis got together. Back then, we'd have to get together physically in hotels like in Atlantic City and places and New Jersey to like actually have conferences. And in the 50s, the rabbis of the conservative movement recommended, for halachic reasons, that they thought that given that the land of Israel exists and given that we have a calendar and given life in America, it it does not enhance the holiday to have these extra days. And you know who got upset? The people who are in conservative synagogues. So the conservative synagogue um, lay movement, United Synagogue, were upset by this because they felt that they didn't want the Orthodox to say we were being too reform. And so then the issue was dropped. So, I mean, there were a lot of really smart halachic rabbis that are like, this idea that keep it because it goes back, 2,000 years ago, we did it differently. Who doesn't love tradition? That's not the most compelling reason to do something as serious as lighting candles, declaring a day holy, taking it off and telling everyone else they need to take off or they're sinning. Like, that's a lot. That's like that's like adding to the Torah. Like, that's an uncomfortable thing. But we backed off because because people said the Orthodox will say we're too reform. And so that's really what happened with it. So yeah, anyway, that's important to understand second day holidays. I will say one final thing about that very quickly, which is the issue of Rosh Hashanah is a little different because the second day of Rosh Hashanah is celebrated in Israel outside of Jerusalem. And it comes from a more complicated tradition around Rosh Hashanah. So the idea of having a second day of Rosh Hashanah has more basis but is still problematic. Okay, any questions or comments? And you are allowed to disagree with me. And I think some of you have done that before, and I respect you for it. So don't feel you have to agree with me about that. But I'm trying to make this class a little bit like, how do we really live it, instead of me just being like, let me read to you from the book. It's like, how do we actually like navigate life? So I'm trying to tell you how I do. Anybody comments, questions, anything about second day holidays? No? Yeah. Okie doke. Then, now I hope you know that I'm following um, from here. Let me share screen. So if I go to the class for today, and we are at Jewish life cycle, birth, babies, bar mitzvah, weddings, divorce, burial, bereavement, and Dona in chapter 4. So what I'm going to do is go to the top of this page and go to life cycle, and um, so where I'd like to start today is, well, since Tiana said she's getting married, I'm going to start with weddings. So I don't want to start with babies. I want to do weddings and funerals, and then we can come back if we have any time left. So if you look under life cycle, memorial, and more weddings, so you will get sort of some stuff from me. And I have, my wedding FAQ. Do you officiate LGBTQ ceremonies, et cetera, et cetera? Of course, absolutely. And I was an early proponent of those in California before they were legal, and I was doing them. Do you officiate marriages in which one partner is not Jewish? And I write, as a conservative rabbi, I'm required to officiate only at ceremonies in which both persons are Jewish by matrilineal descent. This is a policy I advocate to change, but until I'm given discretion, I must abide by it or I'm kicked out of the denomination. And that's very upsetting to me. And so it is, I actually think I should be able to do those weddings, but there are enough conservative rabbis who are dead set against it that my denomination considers it one of the only offenses for which one can get excommunicated. I think that's terribly wrong. Happy to talk about it if anybody wants to. Okay, I'm going to go down to where it says the ceremony. So we haven't done this before, have we? I just wanted to double check. Okay, thanks, okay. So how's the ceremony work? So first thing you have is a ketubah signing. So it says so up here. What is a ketubah and why are we signing it? And so just for the moment, well, I'll leave this up here. I'll make it quick. Let me stop it for now. I'll go back to the share in a second. The ketubah is complicated. It is an ancient document, and it is a betrothal contract. And I teach these things because they're complex. So I'm going to try to summarize it. But if you ever want me to do a class, I do have teaching materials and that I teach on the ketubah. And okay, so here we go. The way that the Jewish wedding ceremony mirrors the way marriage was done even in ancient times as reflected actually in even the early parts of the Torah, even in Genesis. So the way ancient marriage worked in Judaism is that it was in two parts. It was an engagement contract, and then it was the consummation of the marriage. And these things were often separated, often by a year. Now, marriages could be arranged, and often were, and then often there would be and the terms of the marriage would be worked out in a document, and so that the kind of arrangement of the marriage would be reflected in the contract, and then that would often wait a year until the whether there was a ceremony or not. Eventually there were ceremonies, but until the marriage was actually consummated. So in ancient times, the act of sexual intercourse was the consummation of the marriage, and then later a ceremony developed. There are two ways to view all of this, or there's a spectrum on which the two poles are the following. One is a view that views this process as highly misogynistic. And the view is that what the Ketubah, that first of all, the fact that people are arranging marriages at the woman's expense, and not giving her an opportunity to choose her own partners. That the criticism is also that the woman is treated as property, and the property is passing from her male controlling relatives, which are often but not always her father. It could be her brother, especially if the father's dead, or an uncle if the father has died, so that women are like horses and they're being arranged and traded like property, and that this is really offensive, and and that the ketubah still reflects that offensiveness, the acquisition of the woman as property by another man. The other view, and I'm being open with you, that I'm I consider I'm more a little bit with the other pole of it, which is I think you have to actually look at how these documents functioned and what they say. So let's go back. One of the reasons that there's a 1 year period is that actually, according to the Mishnah and according to our ancient Jewish documents that reflect the time period where this was actively practiced and described, recorded, legal cases arose from. So we have a lot of historical material about this that is factual. That actually a woman's consent was very highly regarded. So that one of the reasons that you waited a year is so that the woman could turn it down. And historically, it looked like women had a lot of choice, but not in every case, because every family is different about their coercion and the way they treat the people within their family. But that the year-long waiting period often reflected a time in which the woman could, or the young woman could say she didn't want to marry the man. And so that the waiting period was, and this is also reflected, and I'll go to Tiana, but it is also reflected in the story of Rebecca in the book of Genesis, where Abraham hires his servant to go find a wife for his son Isaac. And the servant goes to the distant land from which Abraham comes and finds Rebecca, and then basically presents to Rebecca, "Hi, I am sent by my master Abraham, who's pretty wealthy and who is looking for a wife for his son who's going to take over the tribe. Are you interested?" And she says, "Yes, I'm going to take you home to meet my brother who's going to broker this." So like, why is even he asking for her consent if it doesn't matter? And then she goes to the brother. The engagement kind of brokering takes place where the servant offers something of value. The engagement ring is the origin of this. They offer something of value to her. And then after that, the brother says, "Great, we've made a deal, and come back in a year." So this really reflects ancient practice pretty well, and this is directly from Genesis. And then Rebecca says, "No, I'm going to go right now. I don't want to wait a year. We'll leave in the morning." And she does. So like clearly the word consent actually happens multiple times in Genesis, where Abraham tells the master, only if she consents do I want her to marry. Go find a woman, make sure she consents, make sure she consents, she consents. So in an era in which consent is important, this is an area in which we actually find the word for consent. And the consent as part of the process was significant. I'm not saying it happened in every single case, but that doesn't mean the process was against consent. The process was trying to build in forms of consent. Tiana.
So it's interesting that you bring this up because I know so I have a friend and he's Jewish and he was dating an Israeli girl who was also Jewish. Uh and for the Israeli girl, her father told him that if he wanted to marry his daughter, that they had to have no contact for a year. And if he still wanted to marry his daughter after that year, then they could get married. So I felt like that was a very twisted way of using that story in a way that's probably not like halachically valid, like uh probably not correct.
I couldn't say it better myself. You said it really, that's exactly what I would say. You nailed it, which is I've never heard of that. It seems like a twisted way to do that. Um, in the ancient world, just it's not like you didn't have to have contact for that year. I mean, in fact, you very well might have contact because it might lead the two parties to feel that they don't want to get married. So does that make sense? I mean, that's what engagement kind of is. As you know, my big thing about religion is I think it reflects human nature. Things haven't changed that much. You know, you give an engagement ring, people wonder how much it costs. They're like, let's talk about money. And then, but when you get engaged, it really puts the pressure on, which is, do I really want this? I mean, that's different than like maybe someday we'll get engaged, or I hope she pops the question, or he pops the question. But and I've told you guys before that I was engaged in my 20s and we broke up. And, but that's the way life is, which is the engagement put the pressure on to really figure out, and she decided she didn't want to marry me. And it's like, it hurts, but like better before than after, right, guys? You know what I mean? And so, like, but I think we needed that pressure because we've been dating a long time and we really loved each other. And it was like, it was one of those things like, wait, it doesn't, well, we know we're going to get married. We were like that kind of boring couple. And, um, and so it was good to have the pressure of like, we're really going to have a date. We're setting a date and we're really engaged. And like, is this really for real? So I've never heard of it used that way because usually it would be a year in which you're trying to figure out whether, like you're really trusting that this is the right thing forever. So, and anyway, so thanks for sharing that. So I wanted to cover the issue of consent, which is I think that in the ancient world, women often did not have consent to things, and I think that's terrible. So you have to look at how did cultures and religion, how did cultures deal with it? Well, the Jewish culture dealt with it by having a big engagement period during which consent was clearly important, even to the earliest stratum of our Torah. And that is something that really needs to be recognized. So when someone says to me they didn't care about consent, I'm like, just in this chapter in Genesis, you've got the word 4 times. Like, what do you mean that they didn't care? Like that, like if you're going to be, I'm fine with critiques, but they have to have evidence. They have to work. The other issue is the ketubah itself. So the ketubah is, and this is where other people can think I'm really wrong about this, and there are other people who think I'm really right about this, but I'm trying to talk about scholarly wise. The ketubah could be, you didn't have the same ketubah all the time. Ketubah could be very specific because it was a contract, so it could be customized. So let's say, Devin, you're going to get married. You could specify, um, uh, I don't know. I'm trying to be silly because I don't want to say anything that isn't. Like my dog is part. Like you agree that even if you're allergic, I can always have dogs. I mean, like or whatever it is. But the real examples could be we're always going to live in this country. Like you can't move. Or we're going to take care of my parents. So my parents are going to live with us. So the documents could actually specify things that are real about the future, that are contractual. And I think that's kind of beautiful. And maybe you think, I mean, I'm an apologist for tradition because I love Judaism. So I'm always like, this is so cool. It's like premarital counseling. You know what I mean? It's like, have you guys talked about the dog? Have you guys talked about the elderly parents? Have you talked about, I don't know, the Down syndrome sister? Like, we got to talk about this. Like, we can't be like, "Whoa, it's all just about parties and dresses or something." I mean, I don't know. Like, we got to get real. Like, what are we talking about? What's the future going to look like? So I actually think the process is kind of interesting that they went through. The other thing about it is that so I like the idea of that. But most people use a standard ketubah today, which we don't know how old it is. It's probably from the medieval period, and it became the thing that all the Orthodox use. So it became like, what do you mean there's more than one ketubah? There's the ketubah, and you order it from ketubah.com, and in that it's a specification of a specific set of money that is going in. So what is this money? Most people see it that the the husband is purchasing the wife using money. That's not what it says. I invite you to read the English translation of the ketubah. So this is what is really going on with the ketubah. You have to read it. You have to understand its specifying. Good. And XMR, I'm going to turn to you. I'll just say, so the main thing is this. In the ancient world, women could not legally own property. That it really stems not from women not having property, because actually women did have property. It meant they had no legal status to own the property on a legal document. Okay. So let's say XMR and I decide to get married, right? And XMR has got a horse. She still has that horse. She's going to bring the horse into the marriage. She loves her horse. She's got her horse. It's not my horse. It's her horse. But if there's a bill of sale for the horse, she can't sign it because she's a woman and she's discriminated against in the ancient world. So that for legal purposes, let's say, so like in practical life, it's her horse, but if the horse gets sold, I have to sign that I'm the owner and I sell it. So women could not legally own property. So what happened is that the property had to be transferred to the man of the household in which the woman lived. Okay, so what does this mean? You know what a dowry is? A dowry is the woman comes into a marriage with a bunch of money and property. If you ever see an old movie like The Quiet Man with John Wayne, Maureen O'Hara, she's going to get married to John Wayne. She loads up her cart, her grandmother's furniture, all of her best dresses, and a chest of money that she sent into the marriage with from the family. But now she brings it to the new home. So technically, legally, all of that property is being transferred to the ownership of her husband. But that leaves her unprotected. Can the man sell the property? Can he spend the money? Good question. Well, if she has no protection about it, then of course he can, right? If she brings over a pot of gold, he can take out the gold and go gambling. And so what protects her? So here, so what the ketubah is the ketubah specifies that all of the money that the woman brings into the marriage, when the marriage will take place, the money that will now be transferred to the ownership of her husband, none of it can be touched. And that it establishes a legal instrument, basically the ketubah or the dowry, and that money cannot be touched by the husband. And in fact, in ancient times, the actual money would not go with her to the husband. It would be kept at a neutral third party, so that if the husband ever divorced her, she would get that money back. That money is actually preserved for her. And the ketubah specifies that should the husband ever divorce his wife, he doubles it. That's essentially what the ketubah says. The money she brings into the marriage is protected. He's agreeing because in it's a contract. The property that is being transferred from one house of men to another house of men that is traveling with hers because it's hers, will not be allowed to be touched by the new husband. And should he divorce her, that is returned to her possession, and he doubles it from his own funds. So I consider that to be an early feminist document, but I'm not a woman. There are other people who are like, this whole thing is offensive and that it should be ended. It's an archaic practice that stems from a time of the oppression of women. And it is a disgusting remnant that we should not be preserved. And so I'm not a woman, and so like there may be women voices here um, that that are more powerful than mine in this regard because I may be blind to certain aspects of it. But I view it as a very early feminist. Okay, so XMR, let me highlight. I got to see what you're putting up here. So spotlight for everybody. So Isabel and David, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. Yep, there's a ketubah. October 10th, 2021.
Entered into the covenant of marriage. Life is a journey which we shall now together embark. Sure.
Oh,
He's looking at me like I'm crazy.
no, you're not. It's beautiful.
So, I mean, this is the language today, right? Life is a journey which we shall now together embark upon with inspiration, courage, and love that we vow to give to one another. Our hearts become one with a core of friendship and compassion. This enables us to be sensitive to each other's needs, to be mindful of each other's respective qualities and strengths, and even our differences. We thus vow to support one another, to nurture each other spiritually, intellectually, and emotionally. We vow to be intimate and to communicate honestly. We shall strive to create a home that emanates love, peace, tolerance, and charity, and one that values our rich Jewish heritage. We promise to be joyous from our blessings and to be courageous amid strife. We shall be determined to succeed and support our respective goals because as one we see the world differently, we see it for the better. All this is valid and binding.
Oh, that is really beautiful.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's feminist.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, so to me, it's like you update it in a way that speaks to you and in a way that reflects your real values. Um, but to get rid of it because it has a kind of polluted origin, I don't think its origin is polluted. I think its origin was really advanced. And in fact, if you read the Mishnah, there came a time, we know the exact year it happened. There was a financial crisis in the Jewish communities of ancient Israel. And during the crisis, um, basically the husbands needed access to the money of the dowry. And so the Sanhedrin created a vehicle, I believe, this is over 2,000 years ago, so that if the wife agreed, the husband could use the dowry, but then the wife would have the first lien on the property should he die, even over the government. So like, again, I mean, a woman to have first lien on the husband's property, um, it became a vehicle to ascribe rights to women. So I think that to me, it's an amazing document. But to update it with modern language about envisioning for the future is part of the idea, and so that's basically all I have to say about the Ketubah. And um, I think it was great to have an example. That was beautiful. So with that, so you signed the Ketubah, and I can answer any more questions about those things. But let me say something about the structure of this. Here, I'll say the structure of the ceremony. If we go back to the ceremony here, the structure of the ceremony actually is in two parts because it reflects both the engagement and the wedding. Because obviously there's no engagement, you're signing the ketubah minutes before the wedding. So what used to take place up to a year apart now happens at the same time. So there are 2 cups of wines. Here I say there's betrothal blessings with wine, and then there are marriage blessings with wine. And so let me say something about that. And it just goes like this. Really, the two parts are preserved in the ceremony that we used to have, which is there's engagement, there's marriage. They're 2 different things. Engagement is trying to figure out with the hard questions what do we really need from each other in order to be successful as a couple? And it is a process, like the ketubah represents a symbolic process. Engagement or betrothal is like, look, obviously we love each other enough to get betrothed, but like, how do we figure out what our needs are in the future? How do we figure out money? Are we going to split the bank account? Are we going to have a prenup? Are we going to pay off my student loans? Like, what are we doing? And where are we going to live? And let's talk about what professions we're going to have. Are we going to take turns? You work and I learn, and then I learn and you work, or I work and you learn. Like, so the first part of the ceremony, betrothal, is about we're in love, but how do we make marriage work and what do we need from each other? And then the second part of the ceremony is about marriage, and it's very short. It's basically just now we're married. You get 7 blessings. And I would say that marriage is about something different than love. So that really marriage is about trust. So the two pieces of the ceremony are the two pieces of sort of Jewish teachings are that no, absolutely. You got it. Take care. The two real issues are like love is not enough for a relationship, and trust is not enough for a relationship without love. Like these are really the two dimensions that we put together in Judaism, and um, that's really it. I don't. I mean, I could talk about for hours, but there's no real reason to. Love is being attracted to the other person and wanting to be with the other person rather than be alone, or I mean, rather just wanting to be with them and wanting to spend your life with them. And there's so many parts of love. I'm not going to summarize it, but to actually be with someone covenantally, which means that you're marrying the person they will become as well as the person that they are. That goes beyond love, because how do I know I'm really going to love this person in the same way? I don't know. I'll be attracted to them. I mean, I know that for the last 3 years, I just always want to be with them. Like, I really want to get married to them. But how do I really know that in 30 years, I'm really going to feel the same way? I'm really going to want to be with them all the time rather than, I don't know, maybe I want to take a vacation all by myself. Um, like, so how does one build a covenantal relationship, which means you're going through time as each party changes? How am I know we're still going to want to be together in 30 years or 40 years or 50 years or 60 years? And the Jewish teaching about this is that it's the same teaching of covenant, that it reflects the same relationship that we have as people with God, which is that the only way to get to that point is to build a foundation of trust. Um, Trust is the thing that gets you through. And trust is largely built through communication. You have to build a relationship where you can really tell the other person what's really in your heart and they don't beat you up over it, and they're able to hear it. And you got to learn those skills about how to say things. You have to become like your best version of yourself so that you speak with truth, but you speak compassionately. And you're compassionate to yourself and you're compassionate to them. And you fill your life with love, with like goodwill, like real loving kindness toward the other person. Um, and you really work that this person can trust that I'm not holding something back. I'm not deceiving. I'm not doing lies of omission. I'm not doing lies of distortion. And so that, what if a day comes where, I don't know, I'm not attracted to them anymore, or I want to take a vacation with a friend of mine rather than with them, or like it won't come as some weird surprise, like, whoa, from where did this come from that you don't, want me anymore or whatever. It's like, it's got to come from like the place, like we've been able to share everything with each other, be really, really, really human, be weak, not weak, that's the wrong word, but be vulnerable, be human. Bodies change, people change. So like, how do you stay friends? You know what I mean? How do you stay that you really, how, why would you, like, if you're going to change, what if the other person stops being attracted to you? You know what I mean? Do you end the marriage? What if the person's body changes? What if they're not able to want to be with you? Um, you know, in it, so like what gets you through? is that there's one person in this world that is going to be there for me, even though I'm changing. And even though I may not be able to even give them as much as I used to give them. But they're not leaving. They're not walking out the door. They're keeping the conversation going. They're keeping the communication going. And that's where you really realize you're in something really covenantal and something special. That it's like, this is not love. It's not easy. I mean, it's not love. It's not attraction. It's not passion. It really is like unconditional love. I mean, it really is that this person knows me in my very non-dramatic, non-amazing self. You know, I can be incredibly boring. I can be incredibly repetitive. Um, I, you know, I can age poorly. Um, but like this person isn't going anywhere, and I'm going to do that for them. And so that's really the ceremony is based on, in a way, these two aspects. It's not just you get engaged and a year later you get married. It's really two forms of sanctity. And I think that's really where it's structured. And then all of the rest of it is just ritual. I mean, just ritual. It's just ritual. And the wedding there is, um, you have a chuppah, which just means some kind of canopy. There are no rules about the chuppah. There are no dimensions. It has to be some kind of canopy. Symbolizes that it's the new home that you're creating, and that it has open walls, so that you're creating a space of holiness, like the Holy of Holies, but also that it's a home that goes out into the world and brings the world in as well. And you exchange rings, which is part of engagement, and you present the ketubah, which we talked about, and then you do the marriage blessings, which is the wedding, the 7 blessings that marry you. The word sheva means 7, and it also means oath. And by doing 7 blessings, it seals in holiness and oath the marriage itself. And you kiss each other, and then you break a glass, and then you go party. And you break a glass because it's a reminder of the destruction of the temple. And all joy in Judaism is you mix in like yin yang. You mix in like the big thing of white, a little bit of black, or the other way, all the black, a little bit of white, which is you mix in a little tinge of how things aren't perfect. And so when you break the glass, it's a memory that the world is imperfect, but hopefully this love can help bring healing to it. And so it's a memory of the destruction of the temple. So this idea that the world is in need of healing ever since the temple was destroyed, and we remember that and hope that the groom and bride can, or bride and bride, or groom and groom, or partner, these two partners, creating this new unit together, will be a part of that healing. So, any questions or comments about weddings or marriage or anything like that? I should show you a picture. That would be fun, or like a wedding video.
I have a
But
few
yeah,
questions.
go ahead.
So I know in Orthodox they do like matchmaking services. Is that something that is a part of conservative Judaism?
It hasn't really been. I mean, at a synagogue where I was a member in the 90s, they had a matchmaker, but not many people went to her. I'll say that.
Mhm.
So, like, I think it really hasn't been. I mean, in Orthodoxy, there really is this idea that what you're looking for is not personal, passionate love. You're looking to make a covenantal relationship where you have common values and you're building, you know, sort of Jewish purposes in the world. And so you want to have attraction, you don't want to have a repulsion, but you're not looking for a soulmate, you're looking for a partner in living Judaism in this world. And so matchmaking services tend to be much more common because in a way you're just looking like you look okay and I look okay to you, like maybe, like basically enough after 7 or 8 dates. And so you kind of see this in Shtisel on Netflix. But so it hasn't really been a thing in conservative Judaism because we assume you're going to fall in love with whom you fall in love with, and you're looking for more than that, I guess. What do you think about that?
I think I stand kind of in the middle. So like that totally makes sense to me, with love being a part of it. But like leaning more towards, I guess, like the Orthodox perspective. I think that just the way that we are so dispersed, um, and even if we get in bigger cities, I feel like it's really hard for Jewish people of the same age, similar interests to actually find love together. And I feel like with the way that everything is now in society, you're almost like guaranteed to end up falling in love with someone who's not Jewish unless you grew up around a bunch of Jews. And yeah, so I mean, I understand why there's not matchmaking, and how, you know, you should have that element of love, but at the same time, to keep the tradition of having Jewish children, to have like both parents be Jewish in the household, I do also think that those kind of things are priceless. And some of that gets lost over generation and generation if, like, you know, you have a partner who's not willing to ever convert like myself, or if like, yeah, I mean, I guess if there's just no interest in that case. And so it's like, are we going to have less and less Jews someday because all the Jewish people are marrying non-Jewish people? So I'm like in the middle, honestly.
I think you spoke really well. I mean, boy, I really appreciate your perspective on it. I really do. I mean, it touches my heart because I think you have a lot of a really good point. I mean, it is a really interesting thing. I mean, we could. I read a study from a couple of years ago that basically said, what's the success rate for arranged marriages? Because there's a lot of data from India where arranged marriages are still pretty much the norm. And the data was like you have roughly the same amount of divorce in arranged marriages with non-arranged marriages. So it's not like that's a significantly controlling factor one way or the other. But I agree, like, I'm, you know, to put it simply with my experience of couples in life is that the longer the relationship goes, the more your common values and what you want to accomplish in the world is what holds it together. So it sounds it sounds superficial on some level to me when I say this, but like one of the things that really holds Lynn and me together is our vegetarianism. And it sounds like so like really that almost sounds like something it's like, oh, you know, I don't know. We like we like scary movies and 80s music and vegetarianism. Like it almost sounds like something stupid from your like online profile. But the thing about the vegetarianism is like we really mean it. Like we really hate factory farms and we really hate the relationship we have with animals. We really hate the way it's destroying the environment. Like and it's amazing how the older we get, you know, and we're definitely aging, is like it's those values that like kind of like, you know, when you're like we used to hold hands a lot when we were in, you know, dating, but you don't naturally reach out and hold a partner's hand when you've been together for 20 years. But I'll say that often, sometimes when we do, it's over these value things. Like we watch something on TV we both agree with, and we're like, oh my God, yeah. And like a hand goes out to the other person. Does that make sense? It's like, thank God I'm with someone who has the same values. And I think that part of what you're saying about matchmaking is that it is a shame that more Jews don't feel, especially conservative Reform Jews, that they don't feel passionate about Judaism's values and purpose in this world. And it's not just to make more Jews. Like Shabbat isn't enough to be passionate about. I mean, so Lynn and I are also, I mean, I use vegetarian as like a secular example, but we also feel it's very important for mental health for people to be close to nature. And so like anything we can do to help people be close to nature, just for their mental health. We feel passionate about mental health issues. We feel passionate about Shabbat. We feel passionate about Judaism. I mean, in that sense, I don't know whether we're great, like pluralistic people. I mean, we are pluralistic, but I don't know if I'm the most ecumenical person because I mean, hell, I think Judaism's like the best thing that's ever been invented. I think it like takes what's best in Buddhism and best in Christianity and best in everything else and puts it together. And maybe that makes me like a kind of a little bit of a fascist or something about Judaism, you know, like I'm a chauvinist or something. But that's honestly what I feel. I want to be with someone else who feels the same way, who's like, yeah, I mean, we don't dislike Buddhism or Christianity, but it's like the parts of us that have studied those things, it's like we cherish this in Thich Nhat Hanh, and we live it with Shabbat. We cherish this with Thomas Merton, and we live it at Rosh Hashanah. Like if we didn't think this was better, I would be Christian. So like I think that, like that's much more bonding to us than Go Blue. So does that make sense? Like I think the Go Blue stuff is pretty superficial. Like we like this same sports team. It doesn't make me want to reach out my hand and hold my wife's hand after 30 years. Maybe for other people it does. So like for me, it's about the values. So I think that it is a shame that more Jewish people don't see that, like, I'm not trying to find someone who's like the only soulmate I could ever have in all of eternity. I'm trying to find someone that I'm attracted to, and they're attracted to me, and like, but the qualities they have are the qualities that I love in a human being, and that they're trustworthy, and that we actually have values that we want to like live together, because that really pays off. It really does pay off. Um, and so, but I guess all that's probably pretty obvious. But I liked your defense of matchmaking for people. Like matching on those kinds of the Judaism is powerful. I think one of the reasons that we don't do it is that um, historically in America, when immigrant groups come over here, and I'm going to say something that's a little bit sexist against men, if that's okay, is that historically when you look at like Irish or Italian immigrant groups, and then Jewish immigrant groups and Chinese immigrant groups, things like that, a lot of times men like to assimilate into America by marrying someone not from their ethnic group. Whereas women have historically tended to be more open to like, I want to marry someone else who's Chinese. I want to marry someone else who's Italian. And this is true in Judaism too. And so what happened is, I'm sorry to say, but the 20th century were full of Jewish men who just, their dream was to marry someone the opposite of their mother. Their dream was to marry someone who was not Jewish, and then maybe make them convert so they don't get written out of the will. And it's just a shame. And there was just this tremendous, I've lived with it all my life, and where I meet many women who are Jewish who are looking for another Jewish man to like, or another Jewish partner, I'm sorry. I mean, really just looking for another Jewish person to share their life with. But they end up with particularly men who are like, oh, I want to like separate from my past and go with some other image of what I think is important. And unfortunately, I think that's a big part of America. I don't think that America is a great place to learn how to be a mature man. But I do think there's sort of a crisis of manhood in our country, and it didn't start with gender issues. Like it's not because of the trans movement. The crisis with men in this country goes back to the 40s, the 30s. It goes back 100 years, which is that America has really been a country that has encouraged a very shallow form of male gender identity. And I know as a man, because it's like what I've been surrounded with has been very pathetic examples of what it means to be a strong and proud person embracing male gender identity. And there have been some examples, and I've really treasured them, but it's not been a very proud American tradition. It's very much a country that encourages men to be very consumerish, adolescent, kind of a perpetual adolescence of like, I don't know, electronic equipment, sports watching, and video games, and I don't know, like not something I dream of becoming 60 years old and embracing. So I hope I didn't say anything that made me look totally stupid with gender language. And you're always welcome to say so. I'm just reflecting on some of what I grew up with, and which made me sad. Some of the conflicts within the Jewish community, and where I do think that Judaism provided me good. Well, it's a good question. It provided some good male gender models, um, uh, but with gender, there are also downsides too of all of our traditions. But at least it gave me a model of a man could be intellectual, did not have to be all about sports, and a man could be sensitive because like the rabbis in the Talmud are often crying and upset. Um, it made me feel that both men and women should be outraged about social injustice, and that was a big part of being a mature adult. So that's not gendered one way or the other. But I mean, I felt like Judaism gave me models of adulthood. What it means to be an adult is to be outraged by injustice. To be an adult means to try to pursue wisdom and paths of peace. And um, and those were important models to me, I think. Does anybody else have any reflections about like how you find male, female, or even or non-binary sort of models in Judaism that you're like dealing with? You're invited to share if you want to. You don't have to. Go ahead.
I have so many. I think like something that I'm really interested in is like queerness in Judaism, and it's like kind of the dynamics of gender is within Judaism is kind of like a whole big thing that I'm spending like an entire semester doing a project on that I'm actually working on right now. And just like especially like there's like 6 different genders slash sexes mentioned in the Talmud. And I'm kind of like working with some of those ideas. I'm really fascinated. Like one of my favorite like interpretations of Torah is like the whole like queering of like the Adam. And the idea that the first Adam was like masculine and feminine, not like a man and a woman. And that whether you find that balance of like sort of masculinity and femininity, like it's very spectrum based for everyone, and everyone has their own like healthy balance of it. And if you fall into like more traditionary binary roles, like that may look like cisgender, like heterosexual orthodox marriage, but like it's not for everyone. And I think like although not every school of Jewish thought like ascribes to that, like I think there's a lot of really cool and beautiful space for that dynamic and those interpretations on relationships. And I just think it's really cool.
If you ever want to like present some of your stuff to the class, that would be a lot of fun for us. You got it. Okay. I know we've been talking about that. So, I know you're working on that project. Maybe in May you would take some time. So just let me know. That would be really cool. Anybody else want to share anything about like how and then we can save some of that conversation for then because I didn't prepare you for it saying we talk about it. But I'd love to talk more about gender in Judaism. Obviously, we talked about it a little bit with Genesis, but I mean more general in terms of how you process it personally and what you see for yourself as you're reading books and living things and seeing things. Your own personal witness and lived experience.
I like that gender is such a big thing in general and that it's more than just, the Rebecca, the Rachel, the Sarah. And when you get into the idea of the 7 prophetesses, it's such a big thing to read about. And when you go into the lesser known women and start reading about the wives, the tales are so enriching. And you read about some of the things they've done. It's a really amazing thing to see what these women have done. And that in some cases, what they've done are more kind of uplifting and sort of enriching to the soul than what their son or their spouse have done. And they're the people we don't even hear about.
Nicely said, Abby. Maybe we should schedule some. Would you like to do like a 10-minute presentation to the class about some of those women at some point?
Maybe at some point. It
Yeah.
depends on how much time I have to do the reading right now, but it's something I personally really love studying about and always have. It's just something that I find such a fascinating topic that it just seems in the past, even since I've been out of college, it's become such a more widely respected topic.
And if you want to, because I know everyone's time short, if you want to assign it to me, I can also prepare something that's like 15 minutes on some of the women that you're talking about. But I'm also happy for someone else to present. Just letting you know, like rather than having it, if you don't have time, assign it to me. So at least we do it. because that would be, I think that would be important. Weeg, please go ahead.
So I before I studied Judaism, I didn't realize how actually progressive Judaism was in terms of like gender identity or even social justice or anything like that. It's funny because like in Christianity, you have this underlying like masculinity, and but I never realized that until I started studying. And then the irony is like they're always saying that yeah, the Jews, the Pharisees are the legalists, when in turn it's kind of like the other way around. But you know, you just don't see that unless you see the other side. And I'm just thankful that I see the other side. That's all.
It means a lot. I mean, I feel a real sympathy with your way of approaching things. And I understand the layers, beneath what you're saying. And it is really interesting. It's, I agree. And what Paul sort of did with the church and what he did with the forms of masculinity in it, it's really very, it is very oppositional in many ways. Um, and so anyway, I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, I wish anyway, it brings me up like, what are some of the images of images, I don't know, models is maybe a better word, models and motifs of gender within the tradition. Like what would a strong man look like in Judaism, or what do strong women look like? Or right, and then there's the Women's Torah commentary, which is really great. I mean, I'm not in my office right now, but it's right next to my desk when
You know what? I think in
anyway.
a way that it's kind of like even your question, what would a strong Jewish man or strong Jewish woman look like? I don't think you'd have an accurate answer because honestly, Judaism's been so villainized in the Western culture that I don't. Yeah, it's just like where would you find a basis to even start? And even if you say, "Hey, this is the ideal," you know, I'm sure the anti-Semitics would have a field day with it.
It's an interesting observation. I was just thinking people's like personal experiences with whatever images from the tradition they encounter. I mean, like for me, like one of the things that I keep in mind is how the Pharisaic kind of tradition, which, as you said, is like often the legalistic kind of stereotype, but in many ways, the way it's practiced is that one really needs to hear the other side of things. Like you don't give a sermon, and like if I said the Ketubah is a great women's liberation feminist document, I wouldn't do that without saying, but there's also the other side. And the others, and does anybody else want to voice the other side? I'll voice the other side to the best of my ability. Like there's this very kind of Jewishy thing, which is that the 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 greatest wisdom is when you articulate both sides. But that modeled to me my whole life the fact that what it means to be an adult is to really communicate, because like you really have to be hearing the other side, and that is a form of compassion. That's a form of making oneself small. And I've often seen, as opposed to like a little bit what I've seen with like promise keepers and stuff, which is, and also in certain areas of ultra orthodoxy, where it's like the man the man says what it is. Like strength is you declare it and people have to follow it. But that's not the image I ever grew up with, because if you read the Talmud, I mean, people who are trying to say this is the way we're going to do it, everyone else is like, that's really nice that you think that, but we have a different way, like, and you're like, so this idea of like control or brainwashing or following orders, like it's not that's not an image that was presented to me of a proper way to be a person, or a man. So those are some of the things that I was just thinking of in terms of, um, what's modeled as being a real adult. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Lauren, I thought you were raising your hand, but I think you were working with your hands. Um, well, uh, so let me, blah, blah, blah. So where does that leave us for the last 15 minutes? Um, Uh, so I think we may come back to this issue. But it's it is I think it's an issue worth coming back to. So in fact, I should put the women's Torah commentary on our syllabus as something worth paying attention to. So we have 50 minutes left, and I think what might be nice to do is let me pick one other life cycle that I think I can do quickly, or we can do quickly. So I looked at weddings. There's more. Again, I mean, there's always more. I didn't do every single part of every single wedding, but that would come up if you want to talk about weddings. But chuppah, breaking glass, wedding contract, 7 blessings, those are the main things. I think one thing worth saying is that for birth, marriage, and death, none of these life cycle events are religious services. And maybe that's not a big deal, but it has become a big deal for weddings I've seen with other traditions. So what I mean, the first time I was ever at a wedding, a friend of mine from high school got married, and right when we graduated college, and so it was the first one I went to. I was in the wedding party, and he was Episcopalian, I believe, but it was like an hour and 10-minute service, and the wedding was like 10 minutes of it. And I remember because it was in the summer, and I almost fainted because I was in a rented tux and stuff like that. And I remember I went to a Catholic funeral, unfortunately for a tragic death in California a couple years ago that I was involved with, and I mean, we had communion. I mean, there was a lot. There was like scripture and communion, and I was like, when's the funeral? So that the important thing is for births, weddings, and deaths, these are not religious services. These are straight up life cycle rituals. So there's no service at the Jewish wedding. I mean, you do 7 blessings, but it's really just the symbolic 7 to say, now go have sex. I mean, in the old days it would have been now go consummate, but it's like now it's official. And but we don't like, except for the blessing saying, "Praised are you, Lord our God, King of the universe," or whatever. Lord, praised are you, whose presence fills the universe, who has commanded us to the arayot, who's commanded us to be ethical even during in the midst of that which involves physical intimacy. I mean, that's about the only mention of God per se. So like it is the life cycle events are focused on individuals, not on God. And that's kind of what I mean by it not being a service. It's not like this event is about God. It's like baby namings this is about family. This is about tradition. This is about becoming a part of the tradition. This is about, may all the ancestors smile upon this moment. May you smile upon future ancestors' moments. But you focus on the family and and the same thing with weddings. That if I do your wedding, you're not going to get a lecture about God. You're going to get a lecture about you guys. I'll be like, oh my God, So like, I would be there and I'd be like, okay, so we all know Lauren and we all know Eva, and like this is like what they're like, and this is what they're like together, and everyone laughs, and this is like we are, and this is like what, and it's about the people. The only exception to that is bar bat mitzvah. And so when it comes to someone becoming 13 years old and being celebrated as an adult, that is in the context of a service, because what we ask them to do is to lead parts of the service. So it is like many rites of passage. A rite of passage is different than, believe it or not, a life cycle event. That's one of the questions I ask in one of the groups I do at the synagogue. So when I'm working with those families, I say, what's the difference between bar bat mitzvah from wedding, marriage, and death? And the answers, those are like milestone, those are life cycles that focus on those people in that family. But becoming an adult is not your 13th birthday party. It is actually about that you are going to show responsibility. The way you show, so all rites of passage involve the tribe assembling and the teens doing something that helps the tribe. It's not like, well, no, the whole tribe will show up and give you gifts because you turned 13. It's not a rite of passage in any culture I've ever studied. So it's something that you're showing that you can take your place in the tribe by doing something that the tribe needs. One of the things that we need is we need people to be able to know some Hebrew and lead the service and read Torah, and that's why that's the focus. And also to share wisdom from the Torah that is new and applies to our time and can help us in our week. So show that you can do that. If you can't do that yet, then can you please learn how to do that? So that's the only way the bar mitzvah is different. Tiana,
I have an unrelated question. I didn't want to
go
interrupt
ahead.
you. Okay. So I was looking and I was really like shocked to think that we only have 4 classes left after today. And I was wondering if so some of the stuff is pretty apparent, like the Google Doc and the 1 to 3 page essay, but I just want to like get a concrete, what are the tangible deliverables that we have to be finished with at the end of the class?
So I'm working with Sam to schedule a date in June. So one of the concrete deliverables is the mikveh is not open on weekends. So it will mean taking time off from work in order to actually do the conversion ceremony.
Mhm.
And there's some flexibility there, but not a lot, because I will tell you that getting 2 other rabbis to devote a day of their time to this and organizing it with Detroit is very difficult. So that it's it's going to be, so we'll pick a day, and it means taking off a day to undergo the ceremony itself. But then the main deliverables outside of that is that you are expected to write an essay that tells us your journey, and I have some questions that can use to prompt you, but usually in my experience, people don't need a lot of prompting. So it's basically, what brought you to this? Why do you think Judaism is your home? In a sense, why are you coming home that fits you? Um, and it gives the rabbis of the Beit Din something to read before they get there. Because otherwise, if each of you has like 20 minutes or 25 minutes in front of the Beit Din, if we ask you, tell us your story, you'll tell us your story and the whole time will be up. There won't be any time for questions. So that the essay has no specific length. Some people write 12 pages, some people write 2 pages, but give us, so that one tangible is to write an essay about what you find, why you find Judaism is the right, fits you, and it's the right place that you want to be and devote yourself to. And then the other thing is to prepare to answer questions from the Beit Din. But I really give you those questions ahead of time, because after all of these years, those questions are pretty predictable. And they usually involve things like, how would I know that you're Jewish if I came to your house? What ritual objects might I see? And answers like, you'd see a mezuzah, or you'd see to be a Jew sitting on my bedside table, or you'd see some Shabbos candles somewhere. So like maybe you'd see my Passover Seder plate or my Hanukkah. So like one question usually becomes, how would I know you're Jew if I went over to your place? And then we sometimes ask questions about holidays, are usually the focus of the kind of trivia portion. The portion that revolves around, have you studied, usually zooms in on holidays. And that's just been the way it's been for a long time, a tradition. So I might say something like, tell us what you know about Rosh Hashanah, or tell me, have you been to a Passover Seder? What are the main things about a Passover Seder? And then we're open to what you say. It could be matzah, could be you remember the maror, could be you remember a discussion about freedom, it could you remember, I don't, so like we're just trying to hear you talk about your experience as a Jew. But the questions usually revolve around holidays. We may ask you what your Shabbat practice is. And then we're not asking you, like, when was the last time you went to synagogue? We're asking you, what's your Shabbat practice? And then it could be, well, I actually have to work half the time, but the other half of the time I at least light candles, or, I mean, whatever it is. Usually we're just expecting you to be honest. So the deliverables are a couple of pages of essay and making time for the mikveh, the actual ceremony, and basically brushing up on your holidays. And I do a review session before we go where I basically repeat what I just said, and then I actually practice the questions. So you're not surprised. But the basic thing is, once you do the essay and you said, you know, like the Google Doc, then if I schedule you for the conversion, then it's pretty much a done deal because the conversion is really based on my sponsorship. It's not based on your performance. So if you show up at the conversion and you're tongue-tied and you can't answer any of the other questions, you can still be converted based on my sponsorship, because that happens. Some people get very, very emotional at conversion, and I like that. Some people are like, I just can't talk because I can't believe this is really happening. And, you know, and then basically the other rabbis look at me and say, Nadav, is this person ready? And I say, yeah, they're ready. They're just nervous. And they say, okay, you know, that's fine too. Well, we loved reading your essay, and now let's finish the process. Any other questions about that you have about that?
Not so much.
But questions could come up, and we sometimes schedule, like if we haven't gotten through the whole syllabus, I will schedule an extra class so that we can get through the material.
Okay.
Go ahead, Lauren and Eva.
I kind of have a question about, I know this isn't a requirement for conversion, but it's definitely something I'm interested in doing, is like choosing a Hebrew name. Like, what are kind of like the specifics, and like, because I have a name I want to use. So like, I don't know, like what are, how do you go about that usually? Like what, obviously if you get called up for Aliyah, like you get, like when, how to, I don't know, just like generally, broadly, how does that come into play?
It's a great question. I can't believe I forgot to say that, because Tiana, Eva's exactly right. You also have to think about what you want your Hebrew name to be. So I would say that you don't have to, I would say that choosing a Hebrew name, it's just like a real intuitive process. I mean, like I feel like you look at lists of names, you think of, it's hard to give a roadmap to it because it's so intuitive. I mean, what I would do if you're asking me like practically speaking, what I would do, part of the problem with Hebrew name lists online is a lot of them seem to be really inaccurate. And like, I don't know where these websites got these listings of meanings of names. They don't seem to be correct. So like if you came to the Beth Israel Library, our little room library near the front door, you will see that there's like a book of Hebrew names. That is a trustworthy source. You can also borrow them from my office. I have several books of Hebrew names, and I would look through them, and I would make lists of like names you think are cool, or names that sort of go with you, or you can approach
Yeah.
me. You're right.
Um,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think like I was kind of more like asking, like when, like, is it at mikvah when
Yeah.
that name kind of becomes official?
Yeah. It
Okay.
becomes official at mikvah, which is you're asked by the Beit Din what Hebrew name have you chosen, so we can write it on your conversion documents. So the deadline is the day of conversion for picking your Hebrew name. And so that answers that. Well, that brings us to the end of our time. So I'm going to have to make a note that we didn't get to birth and death, but that's okay. Let me see what's on the docket for next time, whether I want to continue with that, or let me just see. Oh, I know. I think it's, let me just say learn. So for next time, we are looking at, right, basically services, prayer, and services in general. So it's a big topic and we'll only scratch the surface, but we'll talk about prayer. The assignment is either Steinsaltz's book on prayer, which I list on the syllabus, or Donen's To Pray as a Jew. You know, like there's so, or you could go to My Jewish Learning and look up Jewish prayer. There's nothing in specific I'm trying to quiz you on. I'm just trying to take one session where we look at, you know, what's the basic form of the prayer service, what can be said on an intro level about what Jewish prayer is or might be, or how it's been viewed, and what is some of its structure. So, you know, it's not like you're not going to get asked any of that at the Beit Din, so you have to pick like which area you kind of want to learn, and I'm just going to basically, but those are, Steinsaltz's book is a good book. And To Praise a Jew is okay. I don't have there's no one book I think is perfect about Jewish prayer. Unfortunately, they often reflect the perspectives of the author, and they often reflect the time period in which they're written and the communities in which they're written. And so they're often kind of, I actually find most books about Jewish prayer just really encyclopedic. I find that really weird. It's like studying art and being told, this is when they wrote it, and this is the movement that was happening, and it's like, it doesn't really tell me why that's beautiful or why this piece of art should blow me away. So I wish I had better resources. Those are the ones I've assigned. And we'll talk about prayer next time, and hopefully I'll put in some memorial and mourning. And I probably won't, and I'm not going to spend too much time on baby naming and stuff like that. And so that's where we're heading. Does that sound good? I wish you Moadim L'Simcha, which means may you have great joy for the remaining days of Passover. Moadim means the intermediate days between the beginning and end, and Simcha means happiness. So be joyful, and thanks for spending some time together. I'll talk to you soon. Have a good week.